Hospital Porter's pride and dignity stop the New World Order. Welcome to Panamo TV. Welcome to this a new video actually of a new video of a new kind, which is an interview with someone called Owen Macdonald. Now, I've never done one of these before. I do interviews with people occasionally, not that often, but as compared to other YouTubers, but I do a few. And this one is with somebody new. Now, how I came across Owen is interesting because I didn't know him really. He turned up in the comments section of one of my videos saying, "Hey Ben, how you doing? It'd be good to have a debate with you sometime. I know we'll disagree, but it'll still be good to get you on the show." And I said, "Yeah, sure." And I said in my comment, as you know, if you watch my reply to comments videos, I don't have any problem with disagreement. I really don't, as long as people are civil and well behaved. I can accept any opinion really, but see, like most people are not. That's the problem. You see, you get the trolls and stuff like that. But Owen didn't strike me as a troll, and I went to his channel. And looked at it, and suddenly I realised, like, even though I didn't remember him, I must have encountered him before because I'd subbed to him. I'd already subscribed to him. If you want to look at his channel, there's a link in the description box to it, and please just go to that. And probably the reason he describes himself as if you're interested in discussion with a very left-wing person, please contact me on YouTube or Twitter. Conversations make the world spin, so please don't hesitate to get in touch. Now, that's something quite unusual, a leftist who actually encourages debate, because as you know, most of them don't. So I did get in touch with him. We communicated. We ended up having this discussion. Now, I think maybe the reason I subbed to him was because of Rin Michaelis, because he knows Rin Michaelis, who I've done many collaborations with, as you know. Most of them are a little bit too tasty for YouTube, so I've done a lot of alt tech exclusives with Rin. But he's done like panels with her and things like that. And like Rin, I get the impression he has quite a judicious attitude to controversy, which is good. And I like that kind of thing because I think I do too. So I got in touch with him and we did an interview. And by the way, if you want to watch the feature without me waffling on the way I am right now, just go to the description box, click the link, and you'll find the feature there, which is just on its own without my baggage. So, but if you're still with me, that's absolutely great. And to avoid boring you any further, let's actually show it to you now. So here's Owen Macdonald on the show. I got you to see if it's running. Let's have a look. It just says waiting.
My screen appears to be frozen, so hopefully I can still hear you. But
yeah, it's the StreamYard still working.
Here we go. Right, we're live. Fantastic. And we've been live for 20 seconds. So if you're watching and you've seen all of that, then welcome to the professional standards on my channel. So today I'm with Ben, who has a YouTube channel of his own. Covers lots of things, sciencey stuff, paranormal stuff, bit of extra ordinary topics and such on his channel, and a bit of politics too. And hopefully we're going to have a nice discussion with a rare British theme on this channel. Normally it's Americans I'm speaking to. It's nice to speak to someone from the British Isles. So how are you today, Ben?
I'm fine, thanks, Owen. Yeah, absolutely great. It's great to be on your channel. Yeah, I cover a wide variety of subjects in a huge number. So I can talk about almost any subject really. But so we've got no plan for this. You didn't send me any bullet points, so you fire away, and I'll do my best to respond. If I don't have an answer for something, I'll just say I don't have an answer for that.
That's okay.
Doesn't mean I couldn't find one. It just means I can't think of one right now.
I think it would be good then to start with sort of where roughly you'd put yourself in terms of politics. I mean, we often like to give ourselves like labels and positions and such, and there's always a left-right sort of spectrum. I would typically say I'd position myself fairly left-wing. Where roughly, or what would you feel comfortable calling yourself in a sort of wider political frame?
That's a difficult question to answer, actually. It's hard to know. I mean, I'm a former hospital porter. I mean, that's my hospital behind me, John Radcliffe Hospital. And I did that for 23 years. I was hospital porter there for 23 years, and I did get into trade unionism at that time. So I could say there was a time when I was very left wing. I dropped out of it though quite soon. I was only active really for probably less than a year, because I did have my doubts and difficulties I had, problems I had. At the same, I suppose there's still an element of myself that likes the trade union movement. However, I also like have what you might call right wing ideas. I suppose economically I'm a kind of a libertarian. I used to be a socialist. I used to believe in government hyper-regulation, which would probably solve the problems. Now I doubt that now. So I suppose I'm a centrist. I suppose I'm what Rin McKaylis, our mutual friend, would call a radical centrist. That's the term she invented.
Bit of left, a bit of right. I mean, be a good place to start, I suppose, because we're living in a time, really, at the moment where politics and politicization is sort of everywhere, right? Like, I feel like when I was growing up, obviously, politics was still. It's not as though we have a very idyllic view of childhood where we don't really think about things a lot of the time. If we're lucky, if we're not so lucky, it happens a bit earlier. But we don't tend to think of things growing up as being as political as we are now, where everything is connected to some wider discussion, where everything has an immediate connection to the wider political debates and discussions in the world. And I think part of that is just living in an internet age where you've got information and data and just connections to all world of viewpoints just at our fingertips, which is good in many ways. I think I would never turn this into like, oh, the internet's bad and scary type argument. But whereas when I was a kid, I don't remember the internet being quite as polarized as it is now. Now I feel like there's less breathing room from it, and part of that is, I would say, as someone who is left wing and probably is closer to a socialist, part of the crisis of capitalism, the fact that we're living in a time which sees a cost of living crisis and sees what was once fringe politics sort of come to the mainstream in far right views, and also more open critique of capitalism, where the sort of the neoliberal project, I suppose, like where you've got so in the UK, Labour Party under Tony Blair, Conservatives sort of more right-wing position, but still agreeing on a lot of things with the Labour Party of that era, a general consensus on free market policies, deregulation, somewhat privatisation and such. This consensus was largely accepted by both parties and a wide range of others as well. But now we're sort of seeing quite open discontent. We're from all sides, really. I don't think there's anyone in the UK that's happy with how things are right now. And I think growing up, it was never. Obviously, there were critics of Blair. I'm sure if I was my age then, I would be critical of Blair. But as a kid, it certainly didn't feel like we had the same level of discontent that we do now. And I've got my theory, my reasons for why I would say that is. But what would you say, as a platform to sort of start off on that? Where would you say that sort of?
It's probably true about the breakdown of the previous order. I mean, I don't know how old you are. I'm not going to ask you how old you are, and I don't want you to tell me. But you do look like, I think you look a bit younger than me. You look somewhat younger than me, a decade or so. But I'm. I remember Margaret Thatcher as a child, and I remember there was a left-wing Labour Party at the time, and there's the Conservative Party were like quite radical libertarian capitalists. Since then, we have what's the term I often find in the modern era in the last few years, certainly since 1997, has been the managerial elite or the uniparty. Phrases like that have come out, which refers to figures probably starting with Tony Blair, but then leading to Rishi Sunak, Theresa May, and even Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson appeared to be like an alternative, but he merged seamlessly with the mainstream as soon as the C word epidemic broke out, and probably because he was talking to Bill Gates and people like that. But and now we have Starmer, who I don't think anyone really likes him. I mean, he's a horrible individual. And so as a result, there was a radicalization. I've spotted the same radicalization as you. Figures like Jeremy Corbyn have become very popular now. So you have like a re-emergence of the left. There's even talk about, it's this thing called Your Party, or they're going to make a new party out of it. And at the same time, we have Reform. We have the Reform Party, which is kind of like, well, it covers a broad spectrum of views, the Reform and the right, from just more Tory-like Tories, which I think includes Nigel Farage. There's people like and there's people like there's people who are sort of more into sort of identity politics, or what you might call white advocacy, identity politics, and people like that on the right fringes of that. At the same time, we have like there's identity politics on the left as well, and including there's people who believe in there's people who believe in who are Muslims and want like a radical, like an Islamist party and things like that. So there's all kinds of new forces emerging, I find.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I feel that's probably an interesting sort of phrase, identity politics, because I've always, I remember for the whole time I've really been politically aware online. That is a phrase which has sort of evolved with time, and I feel like it is a little bit nebulous in many ways, because it the sort of way people use it is almost like when you talk about things to do with a specific part of an identity, that is what it's characterized as. And it was thrown at people like you'd bring up, say, racism, and someone would say, oh, you're just talking about identity politics. And I think it often loses a lot of the critical analysis that could be offered if people thought a bit more about what was being said and where it's being applied and such. Because on a base level, like, of course, people's identities are being discussed in politics, and I think in the world we live in, there's no way you can't engage with people's race and gender and sexuality and disability and such, because we'd love to live in a world where every human was just unique. Everyone was just taken at face value, and words mattered over what a person's characteristics were. But we don't live in that world yet because of the social factors that have gone into making society how it is today. And so I think there sort of lies a key difference, really, and a key sort of nuance that needs to be applied to various different sections of society when they talk about their identities and where they are in society. So you're quite right on the right and the far right, and sort of the range of parties which have emerged over the last, sort of with the Conservatives not necessarily being the only voice of right-wing politics. Certainly not now, where I'd probably even argue that Reform have taken the wind of the right at the moment.
Yeah, definitely.
Exactly right. Like, there's not even a debate really. I mean, I feel like the Reform Party are the threat to Labour rather than the Conservatives from the right anyway.
Oh, definitely. But that's the Tories' fault if they don't like it. It's their fault.
Well, indeed. But in terms of identity, like, when people in those right-wing spaces say, "Yeah, we're concerned about white people and such," I think there's a lot of stuff happening there which should be identified as not just it's identity politics, but as part of a wider far-right project, because a lot of the same people in those circles were the same people who were in UKIP and the BNP, same people who were in the National Front and such, and mixed in with that, you do have people who are sort of sucked into it because of like concerns they have about society, but those concerns need to be critically analysed and detached and addressed without engaging with all the blatantly like racist stuff, which I think is still. I mean, it's always loaded, isn't it, when we say, "Oh, there's blatant racism there," but I mean, even with some of the theming and the motifs and the way that a lot of the stuff is constructed, where like when someone brings up, the country is this percentage white and it's going down, like I've always, I mean, obviously, right, I'm not a white person, so it's always going to resonate more. But like, if you really engage with that argument, even if the number of white people in the country went down, what would be the issue? Like, what is the issue there if you really analyse it? And ultimately, their issue is that there's fewer white people, which race isn't something which we should be hinging our society on. Like, it's not something that even really exists beyond the constructions of people. And so when you have a statistic like that fixated on and lied about as well, by the way, because it's not even as though it's just it's not as though they're just looking at like society objectively. They're a lot of the time getting worked up over things which, if you analyse, aren't quite the case. It becomes a concern for people because it ultimately legitimises a rather ugly part of society, which over the course of history hasn't led to the nicest of things. You can win for a second because there's
Yeah,
lots of things.
because you've made a lot of points. I'm not sure I can address all of them, but
Sorry.
it's all right. That's okay. I mean, it's good you explain yourself. But yeah, you're talking when it comes to identity politics. You'll have people of different demography. You and I are of a different demography, so we'll probably see this differently. But people, in a sense, maybe not so much, because people of their own of a demography will maybe want to advocate for their own for the welfare or the interests of their own demography. But like you, if I understand you correctly, if you want to do that, it's important not to. I suppose I would like, if I do that, I would do it in a way which doesn't involve resentment and bitterness towards other demographies, because I think it is important not to judge entire demographies as a group without taking into account individuals. I've known many individuals from all demographies, actually. Being an ex-hospital, hospital portering is actually very, very cosmopolitan, and I served alongside people from all over the world. In fact, as a white British person, I was kind of in a minority, really. There were a lot of like Asians, there were a lot of Eastern Europeans, Filipinos, who were serving alongside me. Therefore, we had a common interest in our identity as hospital porters and our duties. This built a camaraderie, which we all shared. We don't, when it comes to it, people often hear the word equality or equality. I don't think people are ever going to, and people are not equal. People are all different. I think we're all equally valuable as people, but we have differences. We all have differences, and we are all constrained to a certain extent. For example, I would like to be a national hunt jockey, but it's never going to happen. And there's nothing in the world will make that happen unless I become anorexic or a 6-ton horse is ever bred. I'd like to be able to grow Mohican. I can't grow Mohican unless I have a very painful and embarrassing operation, which I don't want to have. So in a sense, we are diverse as people. We are diverse as a human race, as a human species. I believe we're all equally valuable. I would not be in favour of. I don't believe we can erase all differences between us. I believe we can be equal under law and have equal rights. That's how I see identity politics. I don't feel resentment towards any other persons. I would fight for the rights of other demographies. But at the same time, I value my own demography. And I think my own demography is also entitled to dignity as a part of the human family. And that's how I see it, really. And it's important. And I do try to strike a balance there and not get into the realms of resentment, because unfortunately there are people of all demographies who do get into this resentment and feeling of victimhood, and the feeling that the other side is somehow responsible, or other demographies are responsible for all the problems in society. Now, any society where that becomes mainstream enters a very dark place indeed. And I could give you an example from history, but you probably thought of one, and you thought of another. So
Indeed,
yeah. So that's how I see it,
okay.
really.
So I think that it certainly touches on a lot of the themes that I was bringing up there, like the what you said about when you were a hospital porter, the fact that there's loads of nationalities and ethnicities and such, and I can imagine the hectic nature of such a job means that you're not thinking about, oh, this person's from Japan, this person's from India, this person's from wherever. It's here's the job, let's just do it. And that teamwork and cooperation and such makes you're not even consider, like you're just doing it and you're a team and no one's thinking about, it's like you're all there working together, and that's what I agree with and support. And can I just add?
Can I just add? We were dysfunctional on several levels. There were broke between, but these were very often not on demographic lines. These were more
it's
clashes of personality, things like that.
Yeah, it's just normal human things, right? Like in an ideal society, like of course no one's saying like everyone's gonna just perfectly come together and hold hands and sing Kumbaya and it's all gonna be like not one conflict ever again. Like, but the fact that, as you say, the frustrations were the legitimate frustrations of working in a busy, hectic place like a hospital, where of course there's going to, and working in a team of people, of course there's going to be people who think differently and have different attitudes and perspectives and stuff. But as you say, no one's thinking, oh well, I can't work with that person because they don't have an English surname, whatever. And
Yeah.
if they are, then it's certainly not one of the main themes, or they're perhaps asked to sort of shuffle along and move along, because it's the sort of job that you need to just get on with it. You can't. There's no time for
Yeah.
things like that.
In fact, it was policy. We couldn't actually say I don't want to work with that person because of their nationality. We couldn't say that.
Yeah.
And to be honest, it didn't really need to be enforced. The necessity of the duty and the situation didn't, as you said.
Yeah.
It didn't really. That sort of thing really didn't need to be enforced.
And rightfully so, right? And I think that's the sort of point. Like we all, myself and the vast majority of people, just want to get on with their lives and treat people on the merits of who they are, right? Like no one, if we walk down the street, I wouldn't think, oh, that person is white. It's just a case of wanting to go about the livelihoods normally, but where that has been interrupted by the racialization of society. And I think there's an important bit of history that race obviously doesn't exist scientifically. It's not as though if aliens were to fly past, they would classify humans by race. They'd have to look at the social world, where race was created by racists to classify the world into white, black, and black is used as a derogatory way to consider people for labour exploitation and such. And over time, we
white is used in a derogatory term. White is used in a derogatory term too in some circumstances. I'd say.
Oh, of course. What I'm saying though is that the way society has structured itself and how historically race emerged was through the colonial expansion and through the exploitation of the global south and such. And so the reason people started perhaps sort of basing a lot of their political arguments on race and saying, we've got to empower black people and such, and we've got to, black people saying, we've got to say something about this, is in direct response to said racist attitudes and such. And there's been a lot of progress, because I certainly feel, whilst of course racism has existed in my life, there's no way, I'd be able to be having this room with you now if there hadn't been significant progress on racism in society and such. But I think the reason there is still the reason I think I'm sort of wary of sort of the idea that all identity politics all things that are labelled identity politics are the same is because there is still a racist element in society, and there is still something that has been manipulated to co-opt people's ideas and to funnel people into bad faith arguments and such. And so when we think about the fact that a lot of white people feel that they need someone to advocate for their race, everyone needs someone to advocate for them, worker solidarity and people exploiting the average person, the fact that there's cost of living crisis, the fact that billionaire corporations are making so much money whilst the average person's energy bills are going through the roof and rent is just ridiculous and such, and you can't buy fruit without draining out your credit card or whatever. The fact that's going on is something everyone is affected by, but it's co-opted a bit by bad faith actors who I think are quite prevalent in groups like Reform and such, who turn it into, the immigrants are taking away your money. There's too many identity politics. They were claiming, some people, that flying a pride flag was wasting council resources when there's poor people in the constituency. It's just nonsense, right? Because it's not. There's no way that putting a flag on a roof is what has stopped people from getting access to benefits or whatever. It's cuts to government spending and such. It's wider political arguments, but it's given a false explanation by racializing it, by sort of turning it into white people are let down by excessive spending on whatever marginalized group they're focusing on this week, and then given a sort of false fire to get people angry about things they should be angry about, but at the wrong people, at the wrong reasons. And then that's fueled also by pre-existing societal racism and uncertainty, which makes a lot of the what could have been a legitimate cause into the sort of racialized violence and rhetoric we see from a lot of people on right-wing and far-right trajectories.
Well, I mean, I think you find that on people on left-wing trajectories as well will also racialize various issues and also be capable of violence. But I mean, there's a lot to unpack here. Like you talked about race being a concept caused by global exploitation of the global South,
Yeah.
and this would be like colonialism from Europe and places like that. I mean, I don't have all the information to hand here. I think there may be more to it than that, and of course, there has been like, I mean, I suppose I should go back to the start, and I'd have to go back really to the beginning and express my my fundamental ideas about how the world works, which is probably radically different from your own. A lot on the left will say, for example, I guess you probably think this: there's a class struggle, as there is like a ruling class, a capital. You talked about the crisis of capitalism. There's a capitalist class, etc., etc. From what I've seen, there is how do I explain this in a soundbite? There is essentially a network of extremely powerful individuals who are, in a sense, they often overlap with what the left would describe as the capitalist class, what David Rothkopf calls superclass. I mean, it's a title of a really good book by him, actually. And but rather than being essentially an economic, in this conflict economics of the left, being kind of like the exploiter, it's more like a kind of, it's more like a nepotistic secret society. It's more like that. How do I describe this? And therefore, I think it's not quite the same. We probably don't see this quite the same way. And this secret society has its own superclass in what you might call the continents and nations that were colonized as well. And they collaborate at a higher level together. It's what's often known as the Illuminati, or some people use the term deep state. That's probably more often the case. And of course, therefore, I mean, rather than if there's in a sense, if there is the poverty in the world, I don't think just emerges accidentally out of a decrepit system. I think it is it's an intentional strategy of the political class, because there's no need for it. It is avoidable, and obviously, like, it's not the immigrants' fault if that's the case. In a sense, immigration is well, partly it's inevitable because we live in a world now where people travel more than they used to. So in the last few decades, we've had various inventions, particularly the jet aeroplane, which means that journeys from different continents now take about the same length of time and have the same length of energy and indeed expense in economic terms as a century earlier a journey to a nearby town would be. So traveling to the United States, which I did a few months ago, California, USA, it's economic, and in terms of time and economy, would be about the same as a journey a century ago to Birmingham from Oxford. So inevitably, people are going to travel more, they're going to emigrate more, and we're going to have a world in which people will meet each other and interact in ways they wouldn't have done a century earlier. At the same time, though, I think that in what the situation we have now is that we have a government actually is deliberately is a deliberate industrial movement of people from one place to another for a particular purpose. That's my own view. And this means we shouldn't. This does not mean we should get angry with the people who are being moved, because they are a part of this exploitation as well. I mean, if it seems that the government favours one race over another, I think it's a strategy rather than something fundamental about their nature. You see, I believe that the Illuminati regard all peoples on Earth, white, black, Chinese, Jewish, Arab, as just another species of farm animal. And I wish if I had more time I could explain more about that. But let me just get this. I've got to get this shameless plug in. Details can be found in my book, Roswell Rising, a Novel of Disclosure, available at all good bookshops now, priced £10. So that's it. I've got that out of the way.
Well, no, it's always interested in aliens and such. So
yeah, there's a bit of that. A lot of some of what we're talking about as well today.
Yeah. So yeah, I suppose to because I think I've realised, as you have, that we're covering a lot of things here. I'll try and zoom in on one part of that, but very briefly. I think capitalist class structure isn't both is and isn't deliberate. So part of it is, of course, there are. I wouldn't call them. I wouldn't personally call them Illuminati or anything like that. I think there are people who have the interests of their own corporations and their own wealth at hand, and so will inevitably make decisions which harm the poorest in society. And the poorest, if it's lots of working people, is gonna naturally benefit them, right? Like if you have a huge pool of labourers that you don't have to pay much, and they're making things which eventually get sold on for millions and billions, like tech and mining and such. Like, of course, it's advantageous to sustain such a system. And I also think that as well as it being a deliberately organised part, there's also just an inefficiency and poor organisation of capitalism, which is that states and countries and organisations want to improve things but are trapped within a system which demands they operate at a profit and continually profit, and you must follow this economic order, otherwise you're outbid by some other corporation with less moral fibre. And so, and it's also not as black and white as the evil capitalist versus the poor helpless worker. Like, of course, it's a multifaceted world. What I think critics of capitalism are saying is that the themes and trends of this organisation lead to problems we see, where resources are, despite being abundant on our planet in many places, falsely scarce and not shared equally. So people are having hardship.
And deliberately rationed. I could say so much about that, but carry on.
No, go ahead. Like you...
The resources on the planet are also specifically, the scarcity is engineered. This is an important point. There's no need for anyone to be hungry on this planet. There's no need for anyone to be poor. Yeah. Everyone could have a decent lifestyle. And so, for example, the key to industry and all kinds of other things to do with society is energy, and we get energy from fossil fuels, oil, gas, coal, etc. And of course, these things are very damaging to the environment. You've seen the damage done by pollution and things like that, acid rain, etc. And so alternatives have been brought in, such as wind power, waves, solar, etc. And the Sanford Hydro, which I visited in one of my recent videos, which is near Oxford, which is a hydroelectric plant. But you see, there are alternatives which are far more efficient and actually could replace that entire energetic situation. I mean, I don't know if I've got time to, but you see, it's deliberately withheld from us. These things are classified by the government, so we can't have access to them. Because if we had abundance, we would have freedom, and scarcity makes us dependent on the state. It makes us dependent, and therefore it gives them control. And this is the fundamental reason that they actually withhold this technology from us. And there's so much more. I cover it in my book. It's a story. It's just a novel, but it's about these sort of concepts. And there's actually a passage here where one of the characters actually tells him and says, because it's just a short passage here. This one of the characters asking the other why the technology is not declassified, and he says, well, why don't I turn that question on my head? Why should they? How can we tell them? Do you plan to knock on the door of the chairman of Royal Dutch Shell and say, good morning, I've just come to tell you your services are no longer required? And he goes on to say, oil is not just the biggest industry in the world, it is industry. It's the lifeblood and the lubricant of civilization. Take it away and what happens? The world order as we know it will descend into chaos. The West will fall into mediocrity. India and China will dominate the globe with their huge populations and vast resources. Energy needs to be rationed and distributed strategically in order to maintain a stable human world. And that's one character in the book actually basically explaining the rules of the game very briefly in this dialogue with another character. And so that's how I see it. I know there's probably something you may disagree on, or something that's beyond your speciality, but that's how I see it.
I mean, there's a lot of themes there which I actually do agree with, right? Like there's certainly, absolutely, the capitalist interest. So obviously we've got different labels and such for it, but the capitalist interest of oil corporations and fossil fuels and the governments which are tethered to these capitalist interests, they, of course, are wary of moving away from fossil fuel production and such, because if you have a world where everyone can produce their own energy, so suddenly countries which were once having to buy tons of oil from other oil producing nations can actually put up a load of solar panels or use their coastline to generate hydroelectric or wind power or whatever. Like suddenly you've got a more equitable world. You've got a world where the years and years of conflict over energy producing materials come to an end because suddenly people can do more themselves. And yes, absolutely, there's a concerted interest and active money spent by these corporations as well to maintain the production of oil, even as we run out of our oil reserves and such, and gas and such. And the planet is being actively harmed by it, and all the dangers of climate change and such, which are both lurking in the future and happening now. Whether or not I would say it's, I mean, I do agree that other nations like India and China obviously have a very, very large population. Both, 1.4 billion is it? Both of them have?
Something, but yeah, I mean, I know that there's a quarter of the people in the world live in China, and about 1 in 6 lives in India. So yeah, put those together, and you're getting on for like over a third to a half almost.
But
yeah.
I mean, I would be not wary because, of course, the governments of India and China aren't ones that I particularly like. I would not agree with the governments there. However, India and China, like, it's important to recognize that they also face the same societal problems, the same corporations influencing them, the same market pressures, and there's a lot of people there who also just want change and democracy and freedom like we do, right? Like it's not as though I think that is sort of tying into the theme of societal racism and identity and such. Like it's easy to conflate the 1.4 billion people of India with the government of Narendra Modi or the actions of the ruling party in China with the over 1 billion Chinese people who,
of course,
like. So I think it's important to remember that as we discuss, India and China as maybe not nebulous threats to the West, but like other powers seeking more power in a capitalist economy.
The character who actually makes that, I've just read out, is actually one of the bad guys. He's actually the principal villain of the story. Yeah. I mean, obviously, like the Modi regime in India is like stirring up ethnic tension deliberately. The Chinese Communist Party, it's capturing people for organ harvesting, things like that. So yeah, I mean, it's appalling. I'm glad I live in this country. I really do. And of course, I mean, could you define racism for me actually? Because you've used the term racist and racism several times. How do you define it? Because it's a word that seems to have many different definitions.
It does, doesn't it? I mean, I think it's part of its history, right? Like, so racism and racist, sort of colloquial, is just like someone who dislikes someone else based on the color of their skin. And when we apply that to the reality of our social world, it's typically an expression of support and sort of affinity with the classification of society based on race, which historically has been one of white supremacy, white nationalism and such. Now, I sit here saying this. Of course, you could have a situation where, like, a black person says, "Yeah, white people are the scum of the earth. I hate them. Society should only be black." And such people do exist, and that person is someone who is also racist. I would never sort of sit here and be like, racism is only something which is going to exist for white people only ever. But we've got to connect things to the lived reality that we're in. And we've got to look at the history of the planet when we discuss a societal fact like racism. And so it inevitably ties back to the creation of race and the creation of race as a category to divide people into. And that was done by people who were of what we would call a white complexion, and people who believed that them being white gave them the power over the rest of the globe to conquer, enslave, and make money from it. And I think that is sort of that's where some contention comes from, because when people try and explain that a little bit and sort of say, yeah, we've got a long history of white supremacy in the Western world and beyond, people, or it's again interpreted by bad faith actors as, oh, you're saying that all white people are complete scum and must be subservient to blacks forever. Like, and of course no one's saying that. Like, we want to live in a world where we don't even have to think about race. We can just live and exist, and everyone.
Well, a few people have said that, but luckily only a minority. I know it's only a tiny few think that. Yeah, I know, but Sorry, carry on.
Well, that was sort of it, really. Like the racism, of course, is the idea that one race. If you believe that one race is inherently better or more deserving than the others, then yes, that is racist. But it's also got to be connected to the wider history of white supremacy and be attached to systems too. Like the idea that you can stratify the world into a racialized form and make money off people basically because of racialized factors, like that is also part of racism, and that does link back to white supremacy and such, and the history of colonialism.
Right. I mean, that's a fairly good definition. I mean, like, apart from you talk about the historical white supremacy, or do you see white supremacy as something fundamental? Like, it's been a fundamental part of the history of the world. It's been that white people have dominated. Not me personally, obviously, but my demography has like been colonial and things like that. Do you see that as like a fundamental thing?
Since the expansion of empire and colonialism in the Western world, so like when Britain starts sending ships off around the world, and the sort of the turn, so obviously. It's people that existed long before anyone was even thinking of like race and gender and civilization. We're talking about sort of the modern world, really. So it's like from 15, 16, 1700s onwards, where European sailors are landing in the Americas and landing in Africa and realizing that if they, because you can imagine the Western nations were still grappling with a lot of autocracy and serfdom and such, and you've got the Enlightenment where people are starting to actually think, society needs to have people thinking critically, and slowly, it takes a long time, but slowly Western nations are putting in the pieces, and people in Western nations, I should say, are putting the pieces to becoming the democracies we are happy to live in today, or happier, I'd say. I don't think we'd say Britain is perfect, but as you've just said, you'd rather live in a country like the UK, a modern liberal democracy, than some of the other countries in the world. However,
definitely.
Of course, right? Like I'm not, there's plenty of things we criticise the UK for, and America, and all those places. But we're still lucky to have the living conditions we do. But you can imagine the thoughts like that of everyone being equal and people should have democratic rights and such conflicts with what's going on in Africa, say, where British sailors and French sailors and whoever are kidnapping the population there and transporting them off to the Americas to work on cotton plants and such to make millions for British corporations. So race is created as a category to sell this idea, almost to say, these people aren't the same as white British people. These are black Africans who are subhuman and who have different skeletons to us and who are different, and they're 3/5 of a human, as they'll later write in the US Constitution. Like, these are things which are what we talk about when we say race was created. It wasn't something which, like, because you could look at if an alien scientist came to Earth and looked at us, they'd be able to see that there was different melanin counts in our skin. Like, I've got visibly more melanin in my skin than you do, but that wouldn't be no one. They'd also notice that our eyes. Actually, do you have brown eyes? Actually,
I do. Yes.
Fantastic. Okay, so maybe not
a lot of white people, but do. Yeah.
We've got different heights and different weights and all sorts of differences. But one of the differences has been politicized, racialized. One of the differences was a major part of history in terms of how society organized itself, and the other differences sort of just taken for granted. Like if you watch the news and the newsreader said, "Oh, this person, he had type A blood and he was a criminal," like, it would be a bit jarring because you wouldn't think, "Oh, well, why is he saying that?" But people,
there's no evidence that's the case.
Exactly. Yeah. Whereas someone might say, "Oh, that person's black and they're a criminal," and it's like, obviously we might think, "Oh, that person's a bit racist," but a lot of people would be like, "Well, of course he's black because he's black. He's a black criminal or whatever." Like, that's what we're sort of saying when race has been something which has been artificially put into human thoughts and such, and that's why. It's important to link discussions of racism and of society back to this moment, which has influenced a lot of history. You go ahead. I'll speak for a minute. Sorry.
No, I mean, I'm I suppose I'm glad I live in Britain. I mean, it's partly because we do have a better standard of living than much of the world. But I'm also I'm a patriot. I'm a patriotic British person. I do love my country. At the same time, I'm not like the British. I don't believe that our imperial era was something good that we should revel in. I mean, the British is a YouTuber who's absolutely convinced that the British Empire is the best thing that's ever happened to the world.
The
I
who,
don't
sorry?
agree. He's called the Britisher. He's a YouTuber. I don't agree with him on that. It's the British Empire was not the best thing that's ever happened. I mean, at the same time, I also think it's something that modern white British people should not apologise for or feel guilty about. I don't feel guilty about that. Um, I regret that it happened. I regret that many of the things that we did as an imperial nation, as many other imperial nations did. But and when it comes down to it, I mean, um, unfortunately, in the past, things such as slavery, kidnapping, things like that, were something committed by probably most people in the world at that time. The Arabians did an awful lot of. They had a lot of slaves as well. In the Americas, different tribes used to enslave each other, etc., etc. Within Africa as well, there was a slave trade. I mean, I don't know if you saw The Woman King in the cinema.
I have not seen that film, no.
No, I don't know. Never saw the film, but it's about the Dahomey Empire and how they rebelled because the French abolished slavery, things like that. Um, so it's something I hate and I wish wasn't happening. Oh, hello, hello, Rockets, hello. Um, that I regret happening, and I also regret the fact that there's slavery in the modern world today. In fact, there are more slaves in the world today than any other time in human history. I mean, for example, in India, there are 75 million people working in indentured servitude, including children, which is 75 million is more than there are people in our country. It's a huge number of people.
Staggering.
Yeah. So what else? What other point did you make? Yeah. Again, um, it does appear. Racism. Like people being categorised by race. It may well have been I suppose, an excuse. I suppose if you're going to enslave people, you have to have some kind of. You have to justify it to yourself in some way. You have to excuse yourself. Most people are not psychopaths. Most people are. I'd say I categorise most people as pseudo-psychopathic. In other words, they are people who. What's the word? They're not actually psychopaths. They have a conscience, but they suppress it. They suppress it and they behave in a psychopathic manner, which means they have to make kind of moral excuses for what they do. And if you are a demography that wants to exploit another demography, you have to and do it in a way which justifies yourself without waking up going, ha ha ha, how can I be evil today? Which most people don't. You have to justify. You have to say, well, it's only natural we do this because they're only 3/5 human. Or, well, they're evil people anyway. We need revenge for the way they used to treat us in the past. Hundreds of years ago, they treated us badly, so we're going to treat the modern members of this demography badly today. Or another quite popular one is, well, we're doing them a favor. We're bringing them civilization. They were living in mud huts if it wasn't for us enslaving them. That's another popular one. So there's always going to be excuses. But what I found is that around about that time, the middle of the last millennium, there was actually the colonial was actually where do I get the details from this? There was a strategy in which they would the Illuminati decided that there was to be this colonialism in the same way that a millennium and a half earlier they created the Roman Empire. And as it happened, they happened to choose Europe as the center for this, but it could have been anyway. It could have been somewhere else. They happened to choose Europe as the center for this. So this is why I suppose I disagree with you over the white supremacy issue on that level, even though I think you're right about a lot of other things.
Okay.
I wish I explained myself in more detail.
Well, you're more than welcome to explain. I mean, we've got the time, so if you wanted to go more into it, then.
Oh.
But no, I'll
go ahead.
Okay.
Hello, Rockaz. Hello, Rockaz has joined us.
Yeah, it's good to see him. So I think you touched on the fact that it wasn't as though it was just the British Empire, just the French Empire, Spanish Empire, whatever, practicing slavery. Of course, slavery and injustice were things. It's not as though the world was completely peaceful and then all of a sudden the British arrived. I don't think anyone is seriously suggesting that. I think the connection to today's society is more pertinent when we look at the Age of Empire and European powers expanding, because that is the foundation for which the modern world has sort of taken off from, right? Like the fact that Britain is one of the best countries to live in terms of like prosperity and human rights and stuff is linked to the fact that we made our ancestors in Britain were made much wealthier by the practices against the rest of the world, and that isn't something which no one is seriously saying, "Oh, Ben, you must personally apologise for what the British Army did in Africa 150 years ago." But we should be able to recognise that, and part of the process of making a fair world would be addressing the vast wealth inequalities and unfair structures which exist between the global north and the global south. And again, that's another thing which I think is loaded because people, you said you're a patriot, and I have mixed thoughts on patriotism and nationalism and such. I think that we should be proud of what we do as a community, and we should be proud of how we act if it's worth being proud of. Like if we do good things because they're good and such, that is great. I sit here as a massive sports fan. The next year, the World Cup's on. Very different sports. I'll be in an England kit watching that, but I see that as a bit of fun, right? Like I sort of, I wouldn't, if England played like Spain or France at the World Cup, I want England to win, but I wouldn't want anything beyond that, like to negatively happen to Spain or France, right? Like,
well, believe it or not, I mean, as a Welshman, I would like to see England win in the World Cup. I would like, and I'm a Welsh guy, so
yeah,
I'd be happy to see them win.
But like, I think we should be proud of things that we influence more than just sort of countries. But like at the same time, like I'm a pragmatist, whilst we have like Britain, the UK as like a thing we're in, we should try and make it better. We need to be very wary of people who use nationalism for nefarious purposes, as we've seen across history. But there is a timeline in which someone can say, yes, I'm proud of Britain, therefore I am going to invest my time and effort into making it a good place for everyone to live in. I like people who made like the welfare state and who built things in Britain and who tried to help British people with various programs and such. Like that should be celebrated. And if they want to say, yeah, I'm British and we're doing that, then we should be cautious about it, but in a pragmatic, right here and now today way, there is a way that can be done properly. But going back to that was a little tangent there, going back to what we were saying about like white supremacy and such, and empires, like I think the reason that it's still spoken about through those terms and why I think it is important to connect it to those things is because of the legacy it's had. There's a reason it's easier to live in Britain today, and a large part of that is because of the role it's played in history. And whilst, say, the Roman Empire also did, like slavery, and as you say, there was loads of societies have exploited people in that manner and continue to. You're quite right. There is 100% still slavery today in the world, but we've got to look at the factors that go into that. So, like in India, for instance. And in lots of countries, actually, where people are trafficked and used as slaves and indentured servants and such, like the economic factors that go into it are part of the wider economic factors of capitalism, right? Like for instance, the most recent FIFA World Cup in Qatar, they used essentially slave labour in a lot of ways, but labourers who were given from East African countries or Middle East and Asian countries, and they invite them over to Qatar and say, yeah, we've got a high-paying job for you, send money back to your family, it'd be great. Yeah. And then the employer takes their passport, they've got no workers' rights, they've got no means of recourse or anything, and they're essentially told you're going to work in like 50-degree heat, otherwise we're not going to pay you. And they're also paying for their own accommodation. And
I'll tell you a story about that in a minute. Yeah, I'll tell you a story.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, go for it. But I think that can be explained not through. I think you have to connect that to the capitalist projects that happen around it, namely the employers wanted to make a massive stadium really cheaply and quickly. Then it can just by saying, oh well, there's always been slavery or there's always been these things. Like I'm not saying you were doing that because I think actually I'm finding myself actually pleasantly agreeing with you on quite a lot of the things you're saying. But Certainly, I mean, you touched on it earlier, but certainly compared to some of the recent conversations I've had, it's been refreshing.
Yeah, I'm not interrupting like the last guy did. Yeah. Not.
But you know what I mean? Like it's, I think we're in agreement because there is that exploitation. It's just connecting it to the social factors and systems which make it happen. Rockaz in the chat says there's still slavery in America, and he's right. If it will let me show a comment, I don't know why my screen.
It's a good point, Rockaz, because if you define it depends how you define slavery. Because you could define slavery as a workfare schemes, because that is a form of civic slavery, and I'm a huge critic of that. So, for example, and this has an awful thing that's emerged in my own country now, is that if you are unemployed for a certain amount of time claiming job seekers allowance, you will at some point be said, well, you need to do 12 hours work a week in exchange for your job seekers allowance. And this means it's called a placement. It's not called a job, it's called a placement. And you'll usually you'll end up working maybe in retail. For example, Poundland. That's why I never shop in Poundland, no matter how cheap they get. They'll bring these people in and give them placements as unemployed people. Now, how the government think that's going to solve the unemployment crisis, I have no idea. Because what happens is these various employers, if you call them that, are actually making their own staff redundant to create vacancies for these placements. So, and there's even an awful situation where several of these people have been made redundant from their job in retail. They've gone to claim job seekers allowance and found themselves back in the same place they were working before for nothing. And so this is creating an entire sector of civic slaves. So if you define slavery that way, and I do, it is slavery. And it's interesting we are reintroducing slavery. It's sense we're reintroducing slavery right now. At the same time, the cost of labor is dropping. And I think there's a connection there economically. And I think that the presence of slavery in society has a lot to do with the cost of labor, because there's always been people, huge numbers of people in all countries of all races who've opposed slavery right through its history. Even in the Roman Empire, there were people who said it's wrong, but the cost of labor was so low that they made it that. The Industrial Revolution actually sort of kick-started the end of the slave trade and the end of mass slavery. Well, it didn't work, but they tried to end slavery that way, make it less official. But yeah, you're absolutely right, Rockaz. Now, I will tell you about the Qatar. You mentioned Qatar. I mean, you mentioned white supremacy. I actually know a white supremacist. If you define a white supremacist as someone who literally believes white people are better than any other, and the world basically would be better off if we just had white people running everything, I know someone like that. He was actually my shift partner at my hospital when I was a theatre porter. He was my shift partner. Oddly enough, he was not white. He was Filipino. But he hated all races apart from what he was a huge racist. He really had burning hatred for many races, and he was very you spoke with a lot of racial slurs and things like that. And I said to him at one point, but one of the other Filipinos, a guy called, I won't say his name, but he was acting senior port, he's a Filipino bastard. This guy called him a Filipino bastard to me, not to his face. And I said, but you're Filipino. And he says, yeah, Filipinos are scum. And I said, but you're a Filipino. And he said, yeah. I said, do you love your wife? And he said, no, not really. She's all right. She's pretty. She will do. She's pretty. And I said, why? She's a whore. And I said, why? Filipinos are all whores. I mean, Filipino women. And he was a very bitter man. But he, funnily enough, had been in exactly the position that you describe in Qatar. He was actually in Saudi Arabia, not Qatar, but he was a product of that very, very same underclass you mentioned. He was brought in to work for various. Funnily enough, he did a couple of jobs for the Carillion PLC as well, in various countries like Thailand and places like that, for like really, really low wages, living in really awful conditions, in exactly the situation you just said.
Yeah.
And
well, I mean, Sorry.
I was just going to say that's the basic story. Him and many other people from Southeast Asia and many other places are treated like a part of that.
Yeah, it's terrible. I'm very sorry, but I find myself feeling a bit for him because it sounds like he's got a very bitter. Yeah, just like it's. But I think that I mean, obviously, I don't know the individual you're speaking about, but you absolutely get people who have internalized a lot of the stuff that you would, like you say, like it's jarring and baffling to think someone of the ethnicity that's being racialized is saying those sorts of things. But I think that speaks to what we're saying about white supremacy and white, these things are not just like, because we would typically imagine like the only person who would say, "Oh yes, the whites are best," are like the head of a KKK chapter, right? Like someone who actively lives in a white-only like town somewhere where the only people they've ever met are white, and they only hear about black people when it's like, from their KKK magazine, where it's like the blacks are coming to America or whatever. Like, I think that we often fail to recognize that it's like a set of ideas which are normalized through our societal customs and cultures and such, and not something which has to be intuitively thought for and believed, but something we just sort of assume through our habits and such. So like with because even with, I think it links into how we think about racism too, and racist, because when we say, "Oh, this person is a racist," the image in our head is naturally one of that KKK member, or of like the Nazis, or like someone who is obviously unequivocally like the most vociferous vision of racism. But as you say, the average person doesn't necessarily think like that. What they do have, though, is a series of experiences and beliefs across society which may have influenced them into holding attitudes which they might not necessarily have criticized or thought about seriously before. So like when your individual, the person you worked with is saying, "Oh, the whites know it best and stuff, the Filipinos, they're scum," like they are expressing the how do I explain? Like the fact that it's better to live in a country like the UK if you're a working person, because you have more rights. Your employer cannot legally fire you at will if you've worked there for a number of. I know you just said like about 0-hour contracts and stuff, and like about the poor working conditions and such.
That's a part of the example of what I was talking about. 0-hour contracts are actually a part of that drive towards a new slavery, in my view, as Lockout was saying as well.
Like exploited labour and stuff, but like you know what I mean, like the fact that generally in the UK you have more rights than you do if you work in countries in the global south, where employers can get away with treating you terribly, knowing that there's a huge pool of labour from not just in the country but overseas, and B, there's no recourse for them if they get found to do something, because it's just a flimsy legal background to protect the worker. But that is, rather than it being like a criticism of the economic system or of working practices, it's repackaged as, oh, the white nations, like Britain, America, Germany, etc., know how to do it properly, whereas the rest of the world is backwards and bad. And rather than it being like an economic criticism, it's turned into the good civilized West versus the savage backwards rest of the world. And that's
what the British are thinks. Yeah,
exactly right. And that exists in many ways. Like the fact that big sports fan. Like you hear lots of so Premier League obviously is very multicultural, diverse. There's footballers from all over the place. And
of course, if you're a selector, you want the best players.
Exactly right. And we've made massive progress in racism in football. It still exists. I mean, the social media stuff at the moment is pretty bad, but by and large, if you were to go to a game and start chanting like monkey chants at a player, you're getting evicted and you're banned from the stadium. Like you can't.
Of course, that's incredibly rude. That's an incredibly rude thing to do.
Exactly right. But how like racism evolves and lives over times and such is in the way that we describe, or some people describe players of darker skin tones and ethnicities and such. So like lots of footballers who are of darker complexion, rather than having their footballing abilities discussed, they'll focus on physical attributes. They'll say, "Oh, this player is physically very strong, and they're really athletic and such," but they don't use the same discursive words to describe their technique and their flair and their intelligence. Like, and part of that is because internally, a lot of the way we view black athletes is through pure physical muscle, which of course exists, but also exists for white athletes that are competing. It's not as though Lionel Messi or Cristiano Ronaldo aren't people who have also trained their bodies to be extremely physically competent. And secondly, ignores the fact that these black footballers are also intelligent and having to think about the game tactically and are doing the same decisions as their white counterparts. It's an example of racialization. And
Well, of
so
course, sport is actually a great sort of it's a great what's the word?
leveler, like a
Yeah, it's where people are selected on ability very much so, because if you're gonna win, you need people who are the best players. Yeah,
exactly. And so I think that is sort of ties to the central theme really. That is why like white supremacy, as well as being something which is yes very tangibly found in certain people who exist in society and sadly I would say are have a very loud voice in certain places at the moment. It also is something that has to be addressed in wider social norms, and that's why I think it's important to try and tie back into what we sort of touched on, like reform and stuff. That's why it is important to, I think, have critical discussions about this sort of stuff with people who may potentially hold some views which could do a bit of questioning. Like I don't
yeah,
doubt that
fair
there's
enough.
people like within because I think for me there are a lot of people in the UK who are right wing and considering voting reform, and I would say that a lot of them, 100% have some pretty racist views. But there's also a lot of people who have these views, but would also say, yeah, I want a functioning healthcare system. I want rich people to be actually paying a bit more tax. I want there to be like trains which can't get cancelled every minute and such. Like
Yeah,
people you actually want to live in a functioning society and probably don't care about. We're not like walking down the street and thinking, yeah, get that black person away from me. Like they're just a person in
yeah,
society,
yeah,
but that person still. I think if we cut away the profiteering, scummy far right stuff, if we sat down and had a conversation, and yeah, it would be difficult in places, and it would at times clash with what they're used to, but we could talk critically about the way that racism exists in society, and also talk about the legitimate economic concerns that exist amongst lots of people, and the cost of living crisis, and the lack of decent work, and the fact that we even in the society that has so much, so many resources and so much technological advancement and stuff, still need to be stuck to the idea of you must work all the time, otherwise society's going to cast you off and put you in demeaning, benefit systems which don't even, work and
yeah,
cancel your benefits if you don't show up to nasty appointments and stuff.
yeah. No, I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the kind of conversation I think we're having now. I mean, I think we're addressing some thorny issues, but we're doing it, I think, in a very civilized way. Well, yeah, I mean, you brought up a lot of points again. And
Sorry, I can't
it's
help
all
it.
right. No, it's all right. I can go. It's good. It's good. You can describe this as in detail, as much detail as you can. I don't know why Joey was a white supremacist. Oh, I said his name now. Sorry. It's quite a common name in the Philippines, and this is many years ago. Um, I don't know why Joey was a white supremacist. I suspect it's because his primary experience of meeting white people was in a much more beneficial way to himself than it was meeting, for example, people in the Middle East, people of the Arabian types, and indeed in his own country. I think it was simply because of that. I mean, he was very anti-Muslim. He despised Muslims because he said the Muslims in his own country were horrible and things like this, and they killed lots of people. So I think it was his own kind of experience that led him into white supremacy. But hello, Audinos. Hello, how are you? Hello. And now, you mentioned taxation. I mean, would it's an interesting question. If we paid more tax, would it really improve things? Because we're paying
Um,
so much already.
we are as
As
like
sort
the
of,
average. I better get
if you have a job and you have if you are earning an income, what proportion of the income actually is forfeit to the state?
So I think it's interesting when we talk about tax because we are sort of average people in society. Like we're not like billionaires. I think when we think about tax and the distribution of wealth and such, people who are left wing and even really just people like centre left and such are more thinking of massive corporations like Amazon or like JP Morgan or like Walmart when we think about where the wealth is coming from to redistribute and to fund social programs. We're not thinking like it's frustrating that so much talk around tax is focused on like how it will affect us because the taxation which hasn't happened, which is what we need to increase, or what is what left-wing people want increased, is on the wealthiest in society, who have, since the sort of neoliberal turn in the 80s, taken huge amounts of resources and money out of society into private industry. And that's why we see multi-billionaires like, it's easy to focus on like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and stuff because they're quite high-profile ones, but there are so many corporations and so many extremely wealthy individuals and boardrooms which basically just act as giant sacks of money, right? Like they're not really contributing to society as such. Like they aren't.
It's kind of, that was what Rothkopf calls the superclass. Some of these are people whose names we know, and some of them are people whose names you may not have heard of. But yeah,
and like I suppose as well. Sorry to add a bit more to that. Like it's also, it's not even necessarily that they're like, again, some of them are not very nice people, but to me it's not like, oh, they're evil. It's the fact that the system we have of capitalism is like you're incentivized to make money, right? Like the whole point is that you take what you have and you profit from it so that you can do more with what you have, and you have more to make from and such, and you accumulate capital and you get to be the best capitalist you can be, right? Like, and we often imagine it in terms of like a small business. Like we imagine like I'm trying to think of something. It would be like the person who makes wardrobes and like some carpenter or something. Like we imagine in the Adam Smith version, like we imagine some person thinking, yes, I'm going to cut down the most the nicest tree. You can tell I'm not a carpenter, right? But they use the highest quality wood and they spend their time crafting the most beautiful, ornate cupboards, and then they'll make the best sales and be able to expand their operation, maybe hire their brother.
Sorry, I'm just distracted. Sorry, Owen, I've just been distracted. That's Rin Michaelis. I recognise that. Sorry. Hi, Rin. How are you? Pardon me.
Yes, our mutual friend.
I
recognised Rin from the little profile picture.
I see a picture now. Yeah, I can on the glass. Sorry, I just want to say hi, Rin. How you doing? Glad you made it. Glad you got up early to see us. Sorry to cut you off. You're talking about carpenters and wardrobes and trees.
Oh, sure, no. So yeah, like we imagine in the idealised version, we imagine some carpenter has you taken the time to build some wardrobes and then sold enough wardrobes to build a bigger workshop, hire their brother on, and now they can make wardrobes for the whole village and expand and be a better capitalist. And it's a nice idea, like when you think of it in like some sort of, I don't know, like Little House on the Prairie type, nice, comfortable sort of existence and such. But when we think of it in terms of today's world, where it's not like the humble carpenter expanding their ideas and innovation and stuff, it's like Wood Corporation buying the entire forest, and all the carpenters are made to go and work for this corporation for a wage that is enough to just about get by, but they still need to go back to that job every day, and they've like deforested tons and tons of land, so there's now only their wood and only their trees and such, and it's a mess. And like the CEO of Wood Corporation's like on some private yacht somewhere, whilst all the carpenters actually doing the trade are not anywhere near that kind of wealth. That is what we're sort of criticising when we're saying, yeah, we need to tax like the wealthiest in society more, and then we'll be able to put that wealth into society to afford the functioning healthcare and the decent transport links, and have people actually with a society in which people have resources there for them, there's more time for people to engage in arts and their pastimes and their hobbies, and people with an actual interest in the industry they're going into can feel inspired and actually have some commitment to what they're doing. And I think this is obviously still within a capitalist system, because beyond the capitalist system, like to sort of more like socialism and stuff, and ideas of complete worker ownership and doing away with the ideas of private corporations being able to profit off their workers and such, like you wouldn't necessarily need to have a central body taxing people, because resources would be democratically owned, and you wouldn't have to have like you wouldn't have to go to Amazon and say, yes, we need to take back like some money from you because you've got a ridiculous amount. You would just be able to have it democratically done and not necessarily as top down anyway. But pragmatically, within capitalist organisations, and we're in a sort of the society we have today, yes, people want to take money from vastly wealthy entities which rely on society to function, and say, yeah, let's use that to fund it. You go
Right.
ahead,
Well,
Si.
would you describe yourself as a Marxist?
I would say that the works of
Well, that's a
Marx
label,
are.
but you know.
It is a label. I think that there's a lot of his stuff which I would agree with, and there's a lot of useful stuff there. I'm always reluctant to say I'm anythingist because
Mm.
I think like Marx said a lot of things correctly. He's also someone who lived over 150 years ago, so I think it's as with anything, rather than sort of saying yes, I completely follow this person to the death, take the opinions that are good and reflect critically on the ones which are less good. It's a bit like with anything. Like there's loads of actors and sports people that I really like, but I wouldn't say yes, I'm their biggest fan because I don't know
Mm.
them. I don't know what they think. Like
Yeah.
I support Fulham Football Club. Yeah, I'm a big fan of lots of people who play for Fulham. Tomorrow they could do something really horrible, and I have no way of knowing. Right? Like so, there's no in my mind. It's better to think of people positively and think yes, I'd like to support a lot of stuff they do, but also have that critical mind as well to not completely adhere to everything they've said. So I would say yes, I support lots of Marxist positions, and I think Marx is good, but I wouldn't say I'm like blindly devoted to him or anything.
Yeah. I've got to apologise to Rin because Rin says I've kept my glasses off because it's more easy when I'm doing these interviews. It's easier not to have my glasses on because there's less reflection on of the monitor. But I didn't actually spot Rin. I do recognise your profile pic. Yeah, but when I saw the name Audie Noss, I just didn't look at it closely. So sorry, Rin. Hello, hi, Rin. All right, but yeah, I do recognise you now when I look closer. Yeah. Now on the subject of taxation, it's fair, if you're going to have taxation, it's fair enough. So, for example, that people, it's kind of based on the ability to pay. So, my dad was an engineer, and he worked for several companies, including pest control companies. Um, and he was a professional qualified man. He went to Polytechnic and things like that. And so he earned more than I did. I'm a hospital porter, which is unskilled labour essentially. Even though, of course, there are skills and tricks of the trade, and I believe we were underpaid. I earned less than he did. I wouldn't expect to earn as much as my dad did. My dad's retired now; he's 76 and he's retired. But um, so he paid more tax than I did. That's fair enough. And of course, when you get up to the super class, they're literally tax free. They literally have like a unspoken tax rebate. So yeah, I mean, if they have a vast amount of reserve capital that could be taxed, yeah, definitely. But then I suppose that's one issue I agree with. If taxation exists, then it should be fair. I agree with that. But is taxation itself at a fundamental level fair? So, for example, it's at such a high level. I do what generally for everyone, it's at such a huge level. So, for example, there have been several minimalist states in the past who have had very low taxes. I mean, in the Bible, there's lots of talks about tax collectors. Jesus made friends with the tax collectors, and everyone hated them because said, "Jesus, why are you making friends with the tax collectors?" Oh, but they're like they're like the prodigal son, and they've returned and stuff like this. All right, so there's lots of things associated with tax collectors, but the tax collectors only took like from James and John and Peter and those people, the fishermen. I think they only took like one equivalent of 1 week's income from them per year. And indeed, the American Revolution was triggered by import duty on tea, and it was made people so angry that they when they actually raided Boston Harbor and they boarded the ships and threw the tea overboard, and that's what triggered the war that led to the creation of the United States and the end of British imperialism in North America. But do you know what that input? Do you know how high that import duty was on that tea?
Yes, but it
You can
informed
Google.
me.
I'm sure you can Google it. You could Google it, but it's 3%. It was 3%, just 3%. Now we're paying my PAYE was like 25% or something when I was a hospital porter. My accountant today says I haven't reached that level yet, but there's national insurance as well, which is it worth paying that because they keep raising the retirement age and things like that. But then when you consider there's VAT, there's tax on almost everything. There's corporate tax, as you say, which is not as high as it should be if you want a fair system. But does it really make any difference when you consider that in some countries more than 50% of capital circulating in the economy is forfeit to the state. And what is the state doing with all that money? They're certainly not doing it to benefit their citizens. Sometimes they're buying very, very expensive weaponry. For example, India has one of the worst poverty problems on earth. It's in terms of like the number of people who are begging and indentured servitude, not just in the severity, but in vast numbers. Yet they have a fleet of 4 nuclear submarines with missiles pointed at Pakistan. They bought 2 new aircraft carriers. These cost billions of pounds. They have a space program as well. Now, I'm all in favour of space programs, definitely. I love the idea of going into space, but not when they have like beggars, little kids begging in gutters. There is. As Jill Scott Heron said, there's that poem, that beat poem, "Whitey's on the moon." And even though I don't like have this kind of, I may not share his views on racial politics, but he makes a good point in that beat poem, which is that the government seem to be very selective. They can spend vast amounts of money on things they want to spend, and spend nothing at all on things they don't want to spend on. And on what they obviously don't want to spend money on is the welfare of the citizens. I accept that. So in that case, does raising the amount of money that we give them from our own income in the hope that they will return it to us in some way through the beneficence of their soul and their amazing altruism, is that a good? I'd say don't give them any more. Definitely don't give them any more.
I mean, you raise some very good points. I think that absolutely it's quite disgusting actually that some states will, as you say, spend loads on getting to space, which could be a big scientific achievement, but really, hoovering up lots of public resources, nuclear submarines, vanity projects. I mean, Narendra Modi, I'm pretty sure, has like a dozen stadiums for cricket named after him in India as well. There's a lot of things which shouldn't be happening. I think that it's very much a case that because we live in a system which has states as a feature of capitalist organization, right? Like it's not as though the states are entities really of themselves. Like they are connected to our economies and to the networks of capital which exist across the world. And so because of that, right wing and centre right and stuff parties are in charge of these states and manage how money is allocated. So the first person who said, "Yeah, let's collect some money from our corporations and our citizens and stuff. Let's have a pool of resources, and we'll use that across society to fund the hospital and the school and whatever." Like that person was thinking logically. That was a good idea. Like because they obviously might have been able to say, yeah, of course they, ideally from my perspective, it would have been like a broader societal change, but they live in the moment. They can't snap their fingers and end all inequality and injustice. So they've got to come up with a way to try and fix the problems of society. And they say, yeah, this company has got millions. Let's make them give a bit back to society, and then that will fund the schools that their workers send their kids to, or that will fund the roads that people need to drive to get to and from work and such. And so because of that, and because society expands broadly from how it was pre-industrial revolution to today, where we've got all sorts of mechanisms and features and such, I think the development of all this has produced more, which then leads to higher taxes, because the average things you're going to engage with today is vastly more than what you were engaging with probably in 1810 or like 1905 or whatever. But attached to that is also the expansion of, as you say, the state, and also of people with moneyed interests with it, like who engage with state activities. So the fact that the state does not always allocate its resources properly is not to say that taxation under our current capitalist organisation should be done away with, because as we've seen in our country, austerity, cutting tax for various brackets and such, has had a massively negative impact on our state operated functions, which, whilst have their problems, they are still crucial for a lot of people. Like I don't know about you, but I was born in an NHS hospital.
Yeah, same here.
You know, like it's exactly like, and it's the fact that in America, my mum would have been billed for her stay in hospital and expected to pay
Yeah,
within a certain time. Like it's a bit
which
scary actually.
couldn't get insurance. Yeah, that's right. And,
When I lived in Manchester, I knew someone who he was like a really big into skateboarding, and he broke his arm when he was in America, and rather than go to hospital, he just made like homemade sling, flew back home, and then got it seen in Britain, like because he didn't want to have to pay however much it was going to cost him to have it done in the US hospital.
I'd probably do the same, actually. Yeah, if I was in this position, I'd probably do the same. Yeah,
Right, and like I mean that one sort of he was saying that as like a sort of amusing like little anecdote, but it becomes quite serious when it's like the people in America actively not getting medical help because they're worried they're going to be bankrupted by the stay there, or they're worried that if they take their loved one to hospital, they're going to be given medical treatment which is just completely unaffordable, even as something as basic as like insulin, which is just like skyrocketing in price.
And also diabetes is a long-term health problem. So if you get that, for example, or you get another long-term health problem like arthritis or something, you can literally be an insurance write-off that no company will cover you.
Exactly.
As a car would be if it broke down too much.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a big fan of the British NHS. I was in it for 23 years, served very proudly inside it for 23 years. So I would hate to live under the American system where you have to pay additional insurance and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And again, no matter how much you pay, they always want more from you. They don't lower your taxes; they always want more from you.
And I think that sorry, just to add the last little bit before.
Sure, carry on.
The end of it was just that I think for us, of course, in an ideal system, we'd all have in the ideal systems beyond capitalist organisation and such, there wouldn't need to be like big taxes and having to fill out all these forms and stuff, because we'd have better management of resources, and we wouldn't put it onto our systems to fund various things, and corporations wouldn't be hoarding billions, and we wouldn't have to come and get money from them either. But whilst we are under that system, whilst we are living in a world that has these economies which rely on the markets and such, yes, we need a central organising body like a state to be able to say, yes, McDonald's, please pay money back into the country, so that the average citizen can have things guaranteed to them, like their healthcare and their education and such. And beyond that as well, I think to lean into a little bit of Marx sort of and such, thinking about the fact that when the corporation made the $1 billion or £1 billion or whatever, it's their workers were needed to produce that. So then they also, logically, they should be able to have the things in their life that they need to survive and need to have a better quality of life and such, to be able to continue the economy functioning and such.
Well, and that was definitely something Marx got right. Definitely got that right.
Anyway, you go ahead, sorry.
So, were you finished? Is that all right?
No, I am. Yeah, I was trying to. Yeah. I was realizing that I was going off on one a little bit.
No, sorry, that's
something. Full stop in it.
Sorry, that's right. That's something Marx got right. Was if employees cannot earn the money to buy the products they produce, then the economy stagnates. He was absolutely right about that. And of course, again, I'm aware that instantaneous change cannot happen. I believe a better world is possible, and maybe possibly in a different way than you do. But that's to describe that would be a very, very big subject to get into. But yeah, I'm aware that revolutionary change cannot happen overnight. There's always going to be a transitional period. I believe we're not going to wake up one day in a post-Illuminati world. There's going to be like a period where one move changes to the other, which I hope does happen. But yeah, I mean, I see your point there, I do. We were going for nearly an hour and a half. I'm going to have to head off soon. But do you mind if I ask you a question?
Of course. Go ahead.
It's a somewhat different subject. You mentioned how aliens would regard this planet and the people on it if they arrived, and how they would see us from the outside differently to how we see ourselves.
Yeah.
You did. Do you ever think about that, about an extraterrestrial intelligence interacting with the human species and planet Earth? Do you ever think about that at all?
Yes, I mean I think we there's loads of pop culture about aliens, right? Like I've watched the X Files. Most people have seen like
No,
Star
good for
Wars
you.
and
Yeah,
stuff.
good for you.
Like, but in terms of like sort of more like critical, like sciencey side of it, I think the size and scope of the universe is colossal, and Earth and the solar system is a very small pocket of it. So I think that for me, there's 100% life beyond Earth. We're not the centre of the universe. There's so much out there. But because the universe is so big, like it's not necessarily unsurprising that I mean, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but I would probably guess that perhaps you do think there's been some alien contact on Earth.
Yes, and
Um,
that's something I've said many times on my channel. So it's okay. It's my words. Yeah, I have said that.
Brilliant. I thought as much. I just didn't want to,
It's all right.
speak for you or anything. But like, I think for me, aliens are fascinating as like a thing to think about, and definitely out there as such. Um, but the like look, we were talking about Illuminati. You said Illuminati a second ago and such, and government cover-ups. And I think that whilst a lot of that is fun and interesting, and definitely like there are cover-ups and such, I don't necessarily think like um, I know X Files is like a bit of obviously it's a fiction, it's a pop culture, right?
Yeah.
But the idea that the government's putting all its efforts into covering up like UFOs landing and stuff, and the contact with other species is to me like a bit hyperbolic. When for me the cover-ups and such are more in the interest of on Earth matters, like
Oh,
their sort
yeah.
of wealth and money and such. Like so you wouldn't like it's like when you were saying about like superclass and like conspiracies and governments and stuff. Of course there are things that that are covered up and that aren't spoken of openly, but a lot of that is in interest of real world economics and capital, and like a government for instance, um, and like wealthy people for instance, they aren't hiding their names because they're in contact with like, aliens and such and part of like secret cabals. It's as part of the organisation of capital. They want to make money and they don't want their name on. Yeah, but they're not necessarily interested in being like really high profile because their interest
Oh, yeah.
is
That's
how
certainly
will
part of it.
exactly right. Like how will my corporation make the most money? And like someone like Elon Musk is like an interesting one because they are happy to have they want to be really popular and they want to have Twitter as their own play thing and such, and they want to be in government and be like a big hero and stuff. But there's lots of people who look at Elon Musk and think, wow, he is a complete turnip and is basically like tanking his company. So let's do his stuff, but maybe on a backseat. A lot of people also, I think, they're wealthy and they want to influence governments and stuff as per the tenets of capitalism, right? Like they want to make as much money as possible, and if they're friendly with numerous state governments, then of course they're going to be in a better position to do that. But they also know that, like, let's say you're one of Keir Starmer's best friends and you're a millionaire. Like
Oh,
Keir Starmer,
poor people. Keir Starmer's friends. Ugh. Carry on.
exactly right. Keir Starmer is not the most popular man at the moment, and so if your name is appearing alongside him, like Musk did with Trump's for ages, it's probably not going to be best thing for your brand, right? You're not going to necessarily
Yeah.
like court the most favour. So and also longevity. Like let's say Labour lose the next general election and the next government's in, the next government might not be as sympathetic to your business interests if you spent the last one with the opposition, right? So like
Yeah.
they have to some extent be a bit faceless, not literally faceless, but like be a bit anonymous and in the background so they can continue their economic deals. But no, you go ahead. What were you going to
Then they
say
can.
about?
Then they can. No, you're right. They can donate to one party, then donate to the other, and no one will notice. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Now, Rin has actually said here. He said the same thing on my channel. My channel. He believes aliens have visited Earth. I believe there's life on other planets, but I strongly don't believe aliens have visited us. That's absolutely right. Rin and I actually did do an entire program about this. It's based on this. John Stewart did like a little piece on it, which I still can't watch because it's blocked in my country. But yeah, we had a discussion about that, and we disagreed totally about it because, and I do. I mean, you're right that you're right in the sense that the universe is bound to be life out there in the universe, and there is. In my view, it is interacting with us. It is already interacting with us. Do you know there's an object currently heading through the solar system right now, for which there was no completely agreed on natural explanation. Are you aware of that?
I wasn't. What do you
It's
mean
called
there
it,
was no
it's called
explanation?
it's called 3I Atlas, which is it's designated as an interstellar comet, but it's actually behaving in a way that Oliver, not John Stewart. Sorry, Rin, I mustn't get those two mixed up. Yeah. Um, yeah, it's behaving in a way that no other comet has. It's, for example, its chemistry is completely wrong. It's also generating internal. It has an internal light source,
What's it called? Sorry.
which 3I Atlas, 3 and letter I Atlas.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I cut you off. And keep going.
Hmm. Well, I've done a couple of videos about it. If you want to, what the best way to find out is probably to watch the videos. I've done about 3 or 4 videos on it, and in all modesty, that's probably the best way to educate yourself on the subject. But there's also a lot of nonsense being talked about in this. So we're just waiting to see exactly what it does. It's not coming anywhere near Earth at the moment. It's actually avoiding Earth almost. It's on the other side of the solar system. It's if it doesn't want to see us, but it's very keen to visit the other planets. Like it's going very close to Mars and Jupiter, which indicates that it is trying to look at this solar system while being aware of the presence of the human observation, trying to avoid contact with us.
So
So it's being very elusive.
its trajectory's taken it closer to
Yeah.
Mars than it has.
Yeah, it's getting very close to Mars. In less than 2 weeks, it goes very close to Mars, and then it's going to travel. It's going to be behind the sun, so we won't see it for about a month, and it's going to come out. And if it stays on course, head towards Jupiter. It might change course, though. You see, it's possible it will change course and maybe stay with us. We don't know. You see, when I say there's an extraterrestrial intelligence engaging with us, it may not be beings that behave like the creatures from science fiction. There's an anthropomorphizing of aliens in science fiction. You know, we tend
Well,
to
of
put
course,
ourselves
right?
in their feet. We tend to put ourselves in their shoes, which we shouldn't do. Even if we don't even know if they have 2 feet anyway. But they kind of like they say things like "Take me to your leader" or "Revenge is a dish best served cold," and things like that. They often, in the movies, they're played by ex-American football players and stuff like this. Real aliens may well not send us electromagnetic signals. It may not because they're incapable of doing it, but because it hasn't crossed their minds. We don't
Well,
know
it
how.
wouldn't be their form of communication, right? Like it wouldn't be like
Mm,
as you've said, like because I find it really fascinating. Like aliens, the adjective and noun alien just means not human, not of Earth.
yeah,
So we often, as you say, imagine little green men coming out of their spaceship and shaking hands with us, but it could just be like a pile of goo, like gloop, just like not even resembling human life. It could just be like cells, could be anything. Um,
it's
so
hard to know how they would evolve because it would depend on the habitat they were in. Yeah,
exactly. I mean,
which could be very different.
I do think I would never like this. Like I said, the comment you just described, the objects or whatever. Like I don't know enough about it. So I've only just heard of it now. I wish I was more versed on. I wish I could spend more time reading about space than I do the stuff I read at the moment. Which isn't to say that I don't
Fair
enjoy
enough.
reading
Yeah, I
about
mean,
my stuff, but
you can't
I've
look at
always found
everything.
space very interesting.
No one
Exactly
can
right.
look
We've
at
only so much
everything.
time. I think that it's important to be skeptical and critical of assigning, like in the same way that humans put themselves into fiction about aliens. It's also important to be skeptical and critical and thinking about the like when. I'm not saying you would do this necessarily, but when people say, "Oh, look, it's Bigfoot, it's a UFO,"
Yeah.
and it's like there's National Geographic what's it called? Is it History Channel where they have these like sort of dramatized like I saw some lights over my house, therefore it is aliens. Like
Yeah, no, obviously,
I think that sort of sensationalism is important to try and avoid because I feel like that can snowball a little bit. But I'm
definitely, yeah,
certainly
definitely.
I'm interested in discussions about this sort of stuff. I think that um, it's important to be curious about the world beyond our world, and that life isn't just limited to what happens on Earth, and we're ultimately one small iota in the vast cosmos, right? Um, but in terms of connecting it to Earth and such, I think that um, whilst yes, there are definitely secret elements of our world and definitely things which happen beyond what we're able to publicly engage with, rather than assigning that to extraterrestrial stuff or secret societies and such, I think that it's important to link it to the social world we live in and the economics and such we live in. And who knows, maybe if in the timeline I described, where like eventually humans get to a better society, maybe it sounds a bit silly, doesn't it? Like saying an alien will pop out and say, "Hey, did you consider that we were here the whole time?" Like, but like for me, I like it's interesting to think about for me, but how do I describe it? The things we can affect and influence here and now are what I like to focus on. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that's fair enough. And I mean, I think about those things as well. But I mean, there is a connection. There's the term exopolitics, which doesn't really appear anymore now. But it is kind of about our. But I've done an entire presentation. Actually, I did several live shows about the anatomy of this secrecy, because the government do know more about this than they're telling us. And of course, the reason they're covering up is for their own. It's for their own purposes. And indeed, I describe it very much in my book. This book is primarily about that. And if you, I know it's my own book, but do read it. Do get a copy. Oswald Rising, a Novel of Disclosure.
Where's it available, Ben? Where
everywhere,
you,
everywhere, including that horrible corporation Amazon, which we were talking about earlier. Yeah, but it's a primarily about that, and it is essentially for their own purposes, and it's to do with all kinds of things, such as the way they're scared that we might think differently if we about ourselves and our world and our society in terms of the cultural impact. It's sometimes called ontological shock. That if it was revealed we were not alone in the universe, we weren't the only intelligent life in the universe. It's also to do with the technology that they've learned from the extraterrestrial beings, because these beings do sometimes contact us. They are very elusive, but they have made contact, sometimes with individuals. There are many people, including close friends of mine, who've had personal contact with non-human intelligences. And sometimes it is through more organised contacts at the state level. But I'd love to go on. I'd love to go on and talk more with you on this, Owen. And other subjects as well. But we've had a really long interview, and I'm getting time.
Yes, I was just thinking that like 20 minutes ago or something you said, but it was you'd have to dash off soon. So no, it's been,
1 hour, almost an hour and 40 minutes. An hour and 40 minutes we've been going. Do you normally go on for that long? Do you normally?
Yes and no. So sometimes I think the typical, like, it's between an hour to 2 hours I normally go on for. I've had some go over 2 hours. I think the longest I've ever done was years ago now, but it was like 4 hours long.
Blimey, that's a lot.
But no, it's been a nice chat. I think that
thanks.
There's been some disagreement, but like I think generally we have
those are the best shows.
Exactly right. I mean, it could have been a shouty one, couldn't it? But no, I think it's been interesting. Not least for me, because I mean, two British people getting to talk. For me is not quite rare, actually, because you'd be surprised that America seems to be where most of these streams end up being.
Yeah, I've watched a couple. I've watched a couple of your videos, and they do seem to be focused on the other side of the Atlantic. Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, so I think I'll edit the title slightly. And to anyone listening, Ben, where can we find your stuff?
Right, yeah, well, I have a very extensive website. My YouTube channel, of course, Ben the JR Porter. But if you just Google my name or Google HPANWO, Hospital Porters Against the New World Order, and you'll find the various multimedia publications. I do a news blog, which I try to update every day, called Hapanmo Voice. I have the main Hapanmo site with lots of portals with lots of based on subject matters, and of course my YouTube channel, Ben the JR Porter, and also Hapanmo Radio, which is my audio show, where I do a live show every week and a podcast show. And there's also the HPWA. That's very, very different. But I do a blog on hospital portering as well, specifically, which I've mentioned in my discussion with Owen. And there's also, I do a weekly show every Sunday night called The Gas Spanner, which is going live at 8 this evening. And that is totally different to everything I've talked about today, because it's all about hospital portering, 100% about hospital portering. So, yeah, so please do check those things out, ladies and gentlemen. And thanks to Rin and to Rockaz for joining us talking live. Much appreciate that, guys. And thanks to Owen for hosting me. It's been really, really good.
Yeah, it's
really
been
good to be on your show.
Conversation. I'll end the live portion here. Thanks everyone for listening. It will be available on replay. So if you haven't seen this live, then fear not. And everyone have a fantastic day.
And so that was Owen Macdonald and me on Hapanwo TV. I hope you did enjoy that particular discussion. I must say I did as well. I'm happy to come back and do another talk with Owen on a different subject if he wants, or take part in one of his panels. And it's actually cool, because and I think actually civilized debate is missing, where there's mutual respect and also an understanding and acceptance of the other. That's very much missing from the modern world. I think I've kind of come to understand that people don't choose their beliefs, even if their beliefs you consider very destructive and very pathological. It doesn't mean that they've actually made a decision to do something that you think is destructive and pathological. And from their point of view, it's not. You see, they may regard you as the same way. They may regard you as destructive and pathological. But do you think you're evil? I don't. And as I said to Owen, I used to be left-wing myself. I was a trade unionist a long time ago. And I did, not for very long, but I did go through a phase where I was a very short phase, luckily. But I did think that the left-wing ideas were the answer. I really, really did. And so we covered some subjects which are quite controversial, and it's very rare that you get this kind of like dialogue where people don't yell at each other and call each other names and hate each other. Especially in this day and age, these subjects are so contentious. They really are, and so divisive. So I hope what Owen and I have done, hopefully, is break some new ground here, and I hope others will maybe follow in our footsteps. So, and you Hapanwo TV viewers, I hope you've liked this too. So what's coming next? Well, I think I've got the popcorn in for Friday, because you know what Friday is, don't you? 3rd of October. I've been talking about it for so long. It's Mars Day. 3i Atlas Mars Day. Yeah, I'm going to have a hell of a lot to say about this. There's lots of breaking news, lots of new things to say about this. I did put up an article on Hapanwo Voice just a couple of days ago, and I will obviously you can go look at it if you want, but you don't have to, because I'm going to cover it all in the coming weeks. So there's going to be at least one video which I'll upload. There's also going to be a live stream, at least one. It all depends on what happens on Friday, because depending on what actually takes place, there may need to be even more material. I'm not going to predict it. I'm just going to play it by ear. But the upload should begin probably on Wednesday the 1st. And maybe do a live stream on the night itself. I'll watch the channel and you'll find out more. In the meantime, thank you all of you for watching Hapanwo TV. Thank you very much to Owen Macdonald for a really, really good video. Hospital Porters, Pride and Dignity, Stop the New World Order.